first of all, taking charge of your own life, but then leading others through your own example to join you, to put their shoulders to the wheel. So if nothing else, to write your nonprofit a check, but more to the point, often doing something physically. I mean, if some they're trying to ban the books in your kid's middle school, going to a school board meeting and raising your hand and saying, no, you're not going to do that. And then inviting people, calling you bad names and stuff, but fighting for what is right. What we do is encourage people to do that, and they do it.
Welcome to Narrative's Leadership Story Talks, where great leaders go beyond the bottom line to create lasting impact. Join hosts Jerome Deroy and Julienne Ryan as they uncover the stories behind real-world challenges, offering practical insights to help you lead with empathy, authenticity, and purpose. Each episode dives into how leaders use storytelling to build trust, foster connection, and inspire action. Whether you're navigating workplace dynamics, driving change, or building high-performing teams.
Welcome to Leadership Story Talks. I'm Jerome Deroy, CEO of Narrative.
And I'm Julienne Ryan.
Great. Before we move on to introducing our guest, I want to remind our listeners to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review wherever you find your podcasts, and also check out our YouTube channel. You can also see a lot of resources and content in the episode notes. So I encourage you to go to narrative.com, NARATIV.com/podcast, where you'll be able to find those notes as well as our archive of more than 200 episodes to this day. So, as always, thanks everyone for listening. And I want to, without further ado, introduce our esteemed guest, John Graham, who's the director of Giraffe Heroes International. He shipped out on a freighter at 16, made the first ascent of Mount McKinley's North Wall at 20, and hitchhiked around the world at 22. A Foreign Service officer for 15 years, he was in the middle of the revolution in Libya and the war in Vietnam. And these are just a few of the stories you can find in his book, Quest, about finding greater purpose through service, courage, and meaningful action. He's also a familiar keynote speaker on themes of leadership, courage, and service. He's done TV and radio all over the world. His latest books are Sit Down, Young Stranger, a memoir, and Stick Your Neck Out, a street-smart guide to creating change in your community and beyond. He walks his talk, including as an international peacemaker active in the Middle East and Africa. John, it's great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. It's delighted to be here.
Great. Well, I'll hand it over to you, Julienne. I know you wanted to say a few words.
Yes, you wrote a very compelling and riveting book, Quest, Risk, Adventure, and Searching for the Meaning of Life. So usually when we talk about a book, what the author wrote, we give a summary. And with you, it was impossible because each chapter is something unique. So I'm changing my tactic today. I'm going to give you a few sentences about how I experienced your book. First of all, thank God I bought it on Kindle because you were with me everywhere. And anytime I had a second to read, I was reading. I even read it at a party I was invited to, and I found a quiet corner and a couch, and it was my companion. Me, who always loves asking questions and talking, I'm like, this is a sign. It's an invitation to read more of John's book. So next, if you were sending this as a script to me or to any of us who work with stories, we're like, this is a little over the top. This can't be possible, but it was. Mm-hmm. And your writing is it's true stories that you're sharing, but I was generally worried for you when I was reading the chapters, even though I knew I was interviewing you in a few days and that you were okay. And then lastly, if that doesn't pique anybody's interest about your life, what I loved was the honesty. And when I work with stories or speeches, I always try to parse it down to one word that captures the experience and the person. And with you, the word prism came to mind. Prism. And it came to mind at 3 a.m. when my brain kicked in and realized light features a lot in your book, as well the fact that multiple things are true at the same moment, but they feed into each other. And with that, I'm handing it back to Jerome, who's going to reintroduce you with our traditional question.
Right. Yes.
I'm glad you said that.
Please go ahead, John.
Yeah. I'm glad you said prison because I first heard prison. I thought, oh my God.
Oh,
Right.
yes, my New York accent. I'm so sorry.
Well, I definitely want to give John an opportunity to reflect on all of that. And I think our first question that we ask of all of our guests should do that. So here it is. What is an experience that has shaped who you are today, still influences you, informs you in some capacity?
Well, there are several, and Julienne sort of hinted at them in her introduction. The first one, I suppose, was growing up in Tacoma, Washington. It's a small city where nothing ever happened and where I was badly bullied and looking for models of manhood. And that search for manhood consumed me. And so the first thing that really helped shape my life, I happened to get a job as a crewman on a cargo ship going from San Francisco to the Far East and back one summer. And it was incredible because in those days there were no container ships. There were just boats with, a lot of stuff on them. And they were run by 50 or 60 really tough guys with muscles and tattoos. And they took one look at this guy. I was only 17 years old, just 17 years old. They took one look at me, this know-nothing kid from Tacoma, Washington. And they said amongst themselves, well, hell, we got some life lessons to teach this kid. And this is a family show, so I won't be explicit, but they didn't disappoint. Now, I spent the whole summer in the Far East. But it began, and here's probably that first point. It began the very first night. I was out on deck, and one of the crewmen came up to me and started making, sexual advances. And another crewman, a huge guy, 250, 60 pounds, worked in the engine room, grabbed this first man, slams him up against the bulkhead, beats the shit out of him, and then throws him down on the deck, and then lets loose a stream of cussing that was just magnificent. And I thought, oh my God, manhood, that's what a real man does. That's what a real man does. And I went back down to my cabin and I practiced beating people up against the mirror and trying to cuss like this guy. His name was Roy, like he cussed. But he was my first model of manhood. And the rest of that summer was wild, was Terry and the Pirates. We didn't just go to safe places like Tokyo and Manila. We were down in the middle of jungles picking up coconut and stuff, and there were barroom brawls and all kinds of stuff for this completely wide-eyed kid, 17 years old, from a very safe environment in Tacoma, Washington. So I came back and I told my parents, no, I don't want to finish high school. I want to go be a seaman because that's what real men do. Of course, they said no. Anyway, a couple of years later, I'm hitchhiking through the revolution in Algeria. Yeah, that's true. Hitchhiking. I was in Europe at the youth hostel on one of those summers, hitchhiking summers when you're in college. And I saw that there was a war going on in Algeria. The rebels were trying to take the country away from the French colonials. So I said, hey, I'd never been in a war before. So I hitchhiked down through there, hitchhiked into Algeria. And at least I was smart enough to put an American flag in my chest so the rebels wouldn't shoot me as a Frenchman, but I needn't have bothered because they were really nice to me. But I remember spending a couple of days with a bunch of French Foreign Legionnaires. The French were losing the war, so these four guys had a couple pistols and shotguns, and they were trying to hold off the whole rebel army in Orleansville. And they were big and they were tough, just like Roy on that ship, the Golden Bear. And so I got another lesson of what real men were like, and that helped shape my life as well. And from that point on, nothing mattered to me but risk and adventure. And so that's how my life really started moving in that direction. The very next summer, I was with a team that made the first direct ascent of the north wall of Mount McKinley. Climbing was so dangerous and so difficult that no one had ever done it, and no one's done it since. It's become an absolute epic in North American mountaineering because it's so dangerous. We did it, and we survived all kinds of near misses. And I just assumed then that my life was charmed. So not only was I completely hooked on adventuring and risk, but my life was charmed and I was never going to get killed. So I thought, well, I was 21, 22 years old. You can imagine. Not only that, but I rode crew for Harvard, and so I put on 35 pounds of muscle or so. So nobody was bullying me anymore, and I was 6.5 feet tall. So I finally had the body to be that, in those days, John Wayne type character. Now, what is it today? Tom Cruise, more modern actors. But in any case, I wanted to do that. I was totally hooked on adventure. And so I told the State Department to send me to the most difficult and dangerous place they had on the war in Vietnam, and they did that. And I became the advisor to the city of Hue in the northern part of South Vietnam for the war for a year and a half. I got more to say, but I can see you're really wanting to say something, so I'm going to stop right here. But the second point came in a battle in Vietnam, and I'll get to that when you want me to.
Well, Julienne, do you want? I'm sort of eager to hear about that.
I'm good. I spoke my piece. I told you. I mean, this is why I said this is an amazing interview.
No, it's great, and you've got us on the edge of our seats here. I think for me and maybe that's where you're going. But I'm always very interested because you can, as a storyteller and someone who helps people with their stories, we're always, and I think as a listener, just in general of entertainment, et cetera, we're always listening for the moment of change when that penny drops. And so it feels like you're setting us up for that in your story, especially with what you learned about what, being a true man is, being a real man is, and being strong, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to let you keep going, because that's kind of what I'm anticipating here. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not where we're going.
I liked too about your writing style is that you're in the moment as the young guy. You're reporting as yourself. You're in the moment. You're bringing everybody in, but then you have a look back moment from a little bit more of a distance as a reflection, and then throughout your writing, you're using a song, and it weaves in at very opportune moment, like a compelling question that keeps haunting you and bringing you and calling you to give an answer that doesn't happen all the time, or it comes in different shapes and sizes. And I kept thinking of John Steinbeck, read The Pearl in school, and that main character always has a song, depending on what's going on in their life, in their head, when they are in the South Pacific. If anybody remembers it from school, they're in the South Pacific, and he's navigating all the changes in his life. So that way of doing that quote and from the song really struck a chord with me. Pardon all the pun about music. Sorry, that came out unintentionally, but
love it.
Yeah.
So what happened next?
The song was "A Sit Down Young Stranger" by Gordon Lightfoot. And I was in Vietnam, in a very dangerous place, just 50 miles south of the DMZ, the dividing line, then between North Vietnam and South. And it was at a time when Nixon and Kissinger had agreed to troop withdrawals, so all of the American military had been removed from that section of Vietnam. But in their genius, the politicians hadn't bothered to include civilians. So I and 4 other civilians were left, not part of the withdrawal agreement. We were left in Hue. And in the spring of 1972, the city was surrounded on 2 sides by the North Vietnamese, who had attacked in what was now called the Easter Offensive. They streamed across the border into Quang Tri to the north, and then came straight for Hue. The idea was to take Hue and then all of Vietnam. That was in 1972. And they didn't do it then. It took 3 more years, as we all well know. But nonetheless, they damn near overran Hue, and I and these 3 other civilians were trapped inside the city. The song, I happened to get a tape recorder from the PX when the PX was still operating, the Army store, and they only had 1 tape, and it was a Gordon Lightfoot tape. Gordon was a Canadian folk singer, and it just spoke to me because it was all about a young man trying to find himself and not finding himself, and feeling great pain and great loss and great loneliness. And Gordon sings the song, and I remember sitting in a chair listening to it, and it made me weep. It made me cry. I realized how lost I was. I didn't believe in the war. I wasn't a patriot. I didn't go to Vietnam to win a war for the United States. I thought the war was stupid, unwinnable, immoral, whatever. I only went over there because of the adrenaline rush. I only went over there because being in a shooting war was the last adventure I'd never had. I mean, that time in Algeria, while I was hitchhiking through a war, I wasn't a participant. Now I was a participant. And so I wanted to be in that situation of kill or be killed as the highest form of adventure. That's how crazy my life had become. Wow. So I'm in the middle of Hue in this battle, and the North Vietnamese come within 6 miles of the city gates. And it's incredible. It's like a scene from a Kafka novel. The refugees are streaming in from the north, where the North Vietnamese have overrun the country. The city officials have fled. The government has collapsed, and yet I'm responsible for the whole damn city. And I've got 500,000 panicked people on my hands now. A couple divisions of North Vietnamese 6 miles away. And I know I can't get out of there, because if the Americans managed to send a helicopter up, it would be deluged. It would be overrun with my own counterparts, South Vietnamese, and I'd have to shoot them off the skids. So I was trapped, and I just sat there realizing all this, coming back to that realization I just talked about, that I didn't believe in the war. What the hell was I doing there? I remember screaming at the mayor that the only way out of this mess was to create order in the city, to start martial law so that we could organize the city defenses in a better way. And that the problem with that was that the city was overrun with deserters from the South Vietnamese army who were raping and pillaging. And so one awful night, the deserters had burned the marketplace, so there was a pall of heavy black smoke over the city. And there were people screaming, glass breaking, artillery thumping, streams of people going past me, heading on the one road left south to Da Nang. And like I say, it was like a scene from a scary novel. And I just sat there with the other 3 Americans thinking, Jesus. And we realized we had to do something. So we went about, just the 4 of us, trying to find some South Vietnamese who were willing to fight, who were willing to restart the city government. I remember finding one guy, a city engineer, I think, and I pulled him out from under his bed. Another guy was playing a flute. I mean, the city government had collapsed, but we did manage to piece together our martial law government and get some of the city starting again. And it turned out the very next morning the skies cleared, and so American fighter bombers from carriers off the coast were able to finally fly, and they bombed the you-know-what out of the North Vietnamese columns and turned them back. And once again, for the 12th or 15th or 18th time, my life was saved. But the realization was the key. And I remember that night saying, what the blank am I doing here? And it was the first realization how shallow my life had become. And there, I'm still trying to answer your question, Jerome. That was the thing, realizing that this adrenaline rush. I mean, I was no longer a kid. I mean, maybe when you're 17, you have that sort of impetus, but I was 28, and people were living and dying because of my decisions. And here I was in a place where I didn't believe. I didn't believe in what I was doing. I was only there for the adrenaline, for the risk taking. How shallow was that? How had I allowed my life to sink that low? And I remember I really did cry. I just got up into a corner and just wept, saying, "What is going on?" And then those fighter bombers come within a few more hours, and my life is again saved. State Department sends me to California, and I start putting my life back together. And man, it wasn't easy. And as Julienne knows from my book, Quest, I fought rearguard actions everywhere because I was so completely into the John Wayne manhood stuff that men had to be violent, and what mattered was risk taking. What I didn't realize was that I had a heart. And I remember in an encounter group in California, a bunch of other men who had the guts to tell me to my face that, yeah, I was a big brawny guy, and no question I was tough. But didn't I realize that I had a heart? Didn't I realize there was another person in John Graham? And I shouted curses at them because I thought they were wrong, because they had attacked my very reason for being, which was adrenaline. But then I remember running down the paths outside this retreat house and finally sitting down and realizing that these men were right. I had, in fact, nailed a big sheet of heavy plywood over my heart, maybe with that first trip on that freighter 10 years before. And I couldn't feel my heart. I couldn't feel emotions. All that mattered to me was being tough, and tough meant being violent. I didn't care about other people. I didn't care about other situations, even though I was for years in the middle of all kinds of awful situations of poverty, disease, and violence. I didn't care about any of that. I just cared about me. And it finally hit me, and it took me years, 3 steps up, 2 steps back, to finally crawl out of that self-centered hole in the mid-'70s. The State Department sent me to the United Nations, which they didn't do it on purpose, but it turned out to be exactly what I needed, because the United Nations, of course, was full of problems, and many of them were problems of all the black and brown people in the world, the global south, the third world, as it was called at the time. And yet the U.S. didn't care about that. All we cared about was beating the Russians in the Cold War. So they put me in charge. They put me in charge as a middle-level officer. They put me in charge of America's policies toward the third world. And I looked around and I saw the poverty, disease, the violence. And instead of closing my heart to it, by that point, I said, no, I'm going to do something about it. I have a lot of skills. I'm really tough. I'm really smart. I have a lot of negotiating skills. I'm gonna make a real difference. And I started doing that. And I'm very proud of some of the things that I did at the United Nations on peace and justice issues. One of them being setting the stage for the end of apartheid in South Africa. I'm very proud of what I did. It turned out that was an extremely risky thing to do, because I could have been fired. The U.S. government wanted to go slow on the South African racism because we had so many business dealings with South Africa. And I ignored my own instructions, and instead I began feeding information to my counterparts from Africa and Asia on the Security Council, how they could attack my own country. And I remember getting a cable from Washington quoting an African foreign minister who was just attacking my Secretary of State, Cyrus Vance, for American hypocrisy and not trying to end apartheid, this racism in South Africa. Saying all the good things. Jimmy Carter was saying all the right things. But in point of fact, we were doing nothing. We were abetting racism. And so in the middle of that, a violent telegram, there were no emails then, I see a sentence that I myself had drafted a month before, 3 weeks before. I had drafted the sentence, given it to my counterpart in New York, who sent it to his boss, the foreign minister of Zambia, who then sent it back in his letter to Secretary Vance. And I had to smile and laugh, because Vance was all concerned about a sentence that one of his own people had drafted, and the Zambians were now hitting us over the head with it. Anyway, all of that pressure finally worked, and I finally got the U.S. government to agree to a really strict embargo on the sale of guns and military ammunition and materiel to the South African military and police. And without those guns and that ammunition, they would have a much harder time of killing, imprisoning, and injuring blacks. And that would be a key point in the end of apartheid. And I was right. That's what happened. I put enough pressure, so the U.S. agreed to that embargo. The European nations didn't have much choice but to go along. And so the UN in May of mid-'70s passed an arms embargo on South Africa, which in fact in time ended apartheid. So anyway, there I was. That was the second turning point of my life, to answer Jerome's question. to find out that I could use what skills I had, not to do good, not to do evil, but to do good. I could work for peace and not for war. And not only that, I was damn good at it because I was smart and tough, and I could use those skills to make a positive difference. And in fact, I outran, if they say in football, American football, I outran my own blocking. I got so enthused about doing good in the world that I realized I had to get out of the Foreign Service because it was now part of the obstacle. And Ronald Reagan was becoming president, and no way a Reagan government would agree to the progressive things that I wanted to do in terms of peace and justice issues. So I quit, and that leads to the third major turning point. I'm going to stop again here before I get to the third point because it's the last one.
Okay.
It pulls things together.
That's
Anyway,
awesome.
So everyone, when you read this book, you're gonna see that when you're talking about relationship building and conversations, and then think about the point in time where we were politically and who was considered a friend or an enemy. You were keeping company with, and some of the people who were your best champions were not exactly would be a traditional choice. So I thought that was very interesting as you went, that you took a lot of risks, not just the things you did in the Vietnam, but in rooms and conference rooms and conversations, and really reinforced the listening and showing up and getting perspective and building networks was, your superpower back then. So.
Yes, indeed. And some of it was just pure, almost chance. I mean, I wasn't even supposed to talk to the Cubans because they were, of course, run by Fidel Castro in that day. And they were considered terrorists and really bad people. And American diplomats weren't even supposed to talk to them. But it turned out that the Cuban delegation at the United Nations in those years, they were all baseball nuts, as was I. So they were the only people I could talk to about the failure of Red Sox pitching that year or whatever, So I started conversations with the Cubans, and we couldn't be seen talking to each other. So we'd meet in little restaurants in the 3 or 4 blocks from the UN campus, and I developed some real friendships. And long story short, I'm in Belgrade along with the Cuban delegation. We're there for a conference, and we all got stinking drunk one night. And the Cubans took me out to dinner, and they insisted on going to a workers' restaurant because, after all, they were socialists. And the Yugoslav government insisted that they have a limousine, which really irked the Cubans. I mean, that was not socialist. So we parked the limousine like 3 blocks away so nobody would see us, and walked to this rundown restaurant on the other side of the tracks, and had a good Cuban meal of rice and beans. And like I say, drank way too much wine. And in the middle of it, we got to talking politics. Now, I knew these guys now pretty well. And so one of us, I don't know, it might have been me, might have been one of them, I can't remember, said, hey, those 150 Americans had just been taken captive by the Iranian government. We all remember that, the Iranian hostage crisis. And who, God knows what the Iranians are going to do to these poor sods. And the American government is really worried about that, not just because of the lies, but because of the terrible embarrassment of having these people trapped, and we couldn't do anything about it. And I said, yeah, it's a real problem for us. And they said, well, maybe we can help you get your people out. Because Fidel Castro and the Ayatollah, the leader of Iran at the time, actually had a close relationship. And if Fidel Castro pressures the Ayatollah to release your people, I bet he'll do it. I mean, the 2 men are that close. And I said, okay. What do you guys want in return? And they said, well, you have a terrible economic embargo on the island. It's killing us. We want you to lift all or part of that embargo. So we scratched out, I mean, literally, this is literally on a napkin. I know it sounds crazy, but yeah, a quid pro quo deal in which the Cubans would use their influence to free the American hostages, and the Americans would lift all or part of the economic embargo that was choking Cuba. So anyway, the evening ends, and I thought maybe that deal had disappeared along with the hangovers. I'm in the UN chamber a couple of weeks later, and my chief friend, a Cuban friend, pulls me behind a pillar or a door or something where we couldn't be seen, and he says, "Hey, John," and he has an accent, of course. I can't duplicate it. He says, "Hey, John, the old man says we'll do it." And I look at him. He says, "Damn it, John, the deal we made at the restaurant in Belgrade, Castro says he will do it. He will intercede to get your people out of Cuba, but you have to make your end of the deal as well." So I said, "Oh,
Wow.
shit. Wow." Because of course I had not told my people about this. I'm not even talking to the Cubans, let alone getting drunk with them
Small detail.
and conducting global diplomacy in a rundown workers' restaurant on the other side of the tracks in Belgrade. I would have been fired. So I then have to fess up. I go to my people and I say, "Hey, this is what's happening, and we should act on this." I was so naive. I got a reply real fast. "No, we're not going to accept it because there's no way we can politically give Castro the credit for anything, including something really big like releasing our hostages. So you tell the Cubans to blank off because we're not going to do it." Oh,
Yeah.
well, I came that close. I came that close.
Wow.
And the American government was that stupid. I damn near got those people out of jail in Tehran a year before they finally did get out. So, that really enthused me. And I realized then I could do anything. I always thought I could do anything, but now I realize that I could be a peacemaker of the first order. So I quit
Right.
the United Nations. I quit the Foreign Service. And then quickly went broke because I thought that by giving speeches in New York City, I could earn a living. I couldn't. And so I was I was running out of money. And a friend says, "Well, they pay a lot of money for guys like you who have a good gift of gab, who speak well, to lecture on cruise ships. I said, "You get paid for doing that?" He said, "Oh, yes." And so it turned out that my very first attempt, I got a job. I got a job on a cruise ship called the Princeton Dam. Now, in those years, this was 1980, they were not 5,000 people, more like 500. I mean, they were not huge behemoths. They were normal sized ships. And so I got to take someone with me. So I took my daughter, Mallory, who was then 13 years old. And Mallory and I go out to Vancouver and we board the cruise ship Princeton Dam, which was visiting Alaska places and then heading off for a summer of cruising in the Orient. And the cruise ship was mostly older people, of course, especially in those days. So there I was. All I had to do was give 2 lectures on American foreign policy during the voyage, and I got this free trip for myself and my daughter. That was a pretty good deal, and I was paid absurdly well. So there I was. So we started off, and we spent a couple of days in Alaska looking at icebergs and glaciers, polar bears or whatever, and then the ship heads off across the North Pacific. And 3 days out of Vancouver, out in the middle of the North Pacific, 140 miles from shore, the ship catches fire, and there's a fire in the engine room, and we're all woken up, and a soothing voice comes over the loudspeaker system and says, "Well, there's been a little fire in the engine room, but we put the fire out. Unfortunately, the ship is kind of full of smoke, so we're going to blow it out with blowers. And meanwhile, we urge all of the passengers to come up to the ship's lounge, and we'll be serving free drinks." So Mallory and I and everybody else, not 500 passengers. Actually, it's not 500 passengers. It's 250 passengers and 250 crew. We're all the passengers all go up to the ship's lounge, and any fool can see that the smoke coming up the stairwells where we had just come was blacker and thicker than when we started. So they lied to us. This fire is not out by any means. And we couldn't even go in the ship's lounge because the ship's lounge is so full of smoke. But it's October rather, in the Gulf of Alaska. and it was cold. So people who had not been warned didn't bring their warm clothes and life vests with them. So they were wrapping themselves in tablecloths or ripping down curtains just to try to stay warm, because we were out on deck now, 250 passengers, and people are starting to stop making jokes, and they were getting a little worried because any fool could see that the fire was not out. And finally, at about 3 in the morning, we're all told to go to the stern of the ship, because and a helicopter flies over, having come from a Coast Guard base on the coast, on the Alaskan coast, and drops a pallet of CO2 canisters, and some very worried crewmen in firefighting gear grab it and disappear into the bowels of the ship. But by now, you can see the smoke curling up over the sides of the ship. Uh, so the ship is clearly burning in somewhere inside. They're still serving free drinks, and not only now, but by now they bring the orchestra out. And here, this is where I always get a laugh. I tell this story. They started playing "Not Near My God to Thee" like in the Titanic, but "Show Tunes" from Oklahoma. So you got passengers out there. The orchestra, a song and dance troupe from Broadway, is playing show tunes, singing tunes from Oklahoma. The smoke is getting blacker and thicker. People are still drinking, uh, and then getting more and more worried, because now there's all kinds of smoke on deck, and something is seriously wrong. We're told about 4 in the morning to go to lifeboat stations. So now we know it's serious. And Mallory and I managed to work our way up to the bow on the port side, and our lifeboat is lifeboat number 2. And it says on the side of it, it's made for 45 people. Well, it looks like there's close to 90 waiting for it, because this was a new cruise ship. No one expected this would happen. So the crew was poorly trained. No one knew what the hell they were doing. But nonetheless, we were there at the lifeboat station. And the captain comes out on the bridge, and I don't know if people know this, but when a captain, he goes down with a ship, they dress up. So the guy has on his dress uniform, and he says, "I'm sorry, but it looks like we've lost the battle with the fire. We have to abandon ship." Oh my God. So I turn and look at Mallory, and just at that moment, the fire burns through the last of the retaining walls, and the windows in the ship's lounge and dining room, which are above deck, above the main deck, burst out, and the fire gulps in all that oxygen, and a tower of flame, 20, 30 feet, leaps into the night sky. And now people are obviously really scared, but you couldn't back away, because if you fell into the North Pacific in the middle of in winter, you die very quickly, because it's so cold. You die of hypothermia in 10 minutes. So nobody falls in, and the lifeboat loading is clumsy, but by some miracle, everybody gets into a lifeboat. And ours is overcrowded, but in a way that's good, because it helps keep us warm. And the lifeboat is lowered. And I remember having, with a couple other guys, having to push against the side of the ship, because the lifeboat was sort of swinging back and forth, and it was a real danger that it would crack the wooden sides of the lifeboat. So we're trying to prevent that. And as I'm pushing against the steel sides of the Princeton Dam, I can feel the heat. I can feel the heat. I mean, this ship is burning. But we're lowered, and I think there were 7 lifeboats, and we all drift off from the Princeton Dam. And we have in lifeboat number 2, there's no power, there's no lights, the radio doesn't work. We have no means of communicating with anybody. And so we're just left out there, and drifting away from the Princeton Dam, which is now visibly burning, with flames shooting out of the center of the ship. In a few hours, it's dawn, and a big tanker answers the SOS and comes near us. But a tanker is so big it can't maneuver to lifeboats. I mean, it just can't. So the only way to rescue these people in the lifeboats is to send helicopters from shore stations, uh, and they lower a steel chair at the end of a steel chain and take one person at a time. And
Wow.
it's risky business because these people are old, and getting them into the chairs without throwing them into the North Pacific is tricky. Uh, but the helicopters do that. They get 7 or 8 people in the helicopter, then they fly to the decks of the tanker, drop the people off on the tanker, come back for 7 more. But it's very, very slow going. And we realize now it's a race against time, because we've been told the night before that Typhoon Vernon was bearing down and that the next day was going to be really rough seas. So they distribute seasick pills at dinner. And now the Typhoon Vernon hits, and the seas are not calm any longer at dawn. And a little lifeboat begins to roll in growing seas. Helicopters work as fast as they can. And it's really funny. The only advice we have on who goes first is from grade B movies, women and children first. So that's what happened. All the women are lifted off the lifeboat. Mallory, my daughter, is the last female to go. And I watch her swing off into space in this metal chair up into a helicopter, and I know she's safe. And at that point, the helicopters are having a really difficult time flying in the growing winds. But they keep coming back and taking 7 or 8 men now. And finally, by mid-afternoon, in lifeboat number 2, there's only 8 of us left. But we're now in a situation where the helicopters can't fly because we're in the middle of a full-blown typhoon. And that means that the waves are mounting to 25, 30 feet. That means that you're going up and down the height of a 5-story building with every wave. The winds are 60 knots. We're all deathly seasick, of course, by now. But more to the point is we're all dying of hypothermia. And I've climbed enough mountains to know what hypothermia looks like. You get cold, but then you feel warm again, and you go to sleep, and you don't wake up. That's how you die of hypothermia. We don't have warm clothes, so we're all dying of hypothermia. And it's just a matter of time before we're dead. But more to the point, we know now that there are the helicopter pilot sends down that there are Coast Guard cutters, small ships that have arrived on scene and are searching for us in this storm. But visibility is now down to maybe 100 meters. And it's I don't know what, 1 in 1,000 chance they're going to find us in this wide open ocean, 140 miles from shore. But the ships, the Coast Guard cutters are searching for us. But the thing is that we're running out of light. Now, as long as there's some light, a lookout on the cutters could see the lifeboats when the lifeboats were at the top of a wave. They could see it. But once it was dark, they couldn't see that. So we had maybe an hour left of light. The odds were small enough with light. But once it got dark, we were dead. There was no chance at all. So here we are. The 8 of us were deathly seasick. We're dying of hypothermia. If we don't get washed out of the boat, hypothermia will kill us in 5 or 6 hours. But key to the point is we'll be dead really in 1 hour because it'll be dark and our fates are sealed. So here comes that answer to Jerome's question, which is now taking me a half an hour to answer. I'm sorry. I look up and I say, I'm not a religious person, by the way. Wasn't then, am not now. But I say to God or whatever is out there, once I realize that my luck has finally run out, that of all the adventures and risks I've taken, this time I'm not going to pull it off. I'm going to die. Okay. So I look up at it and I start having this conversation with God or whatever. And I say, look, hey, I'm well aware of what my early life was like and the pain that I caused. But at the United Nations, I did a lot of good. I turned my life around. And now I'm being killed. I have another 50 years to live or whatever. And I can do a lot of good in the world. And now I'm getting wiped out. It makes no sense at all. I screamed at God. The other 8 guys didn't hear anything, but I got a message back, and it was like loud, like it was from loudspeakers. And this voice screamed at me over the storm that I had to stop kidding myself. That what I was doing at the UN was great. I'd finally found my soul, and helping end apartheid and all that. But now I was lecturing on cruise ships to make a lot of money, and it was a really copacetic thing. And if I got out of this alive, I was going to lecture on another cruise ship. And the ideals that drive me at the United Nations were fast disappearing. So I had to make a choice. Either I had to get serious about those ideals and have them guide the rest of my life, or I would die out there. Because if I kept living, knowing that I wasn't anywhere near my life purpose, which was service, using my skills to help make the world a better place, I might as well die out there, because the rest of my life wouldn't be worth a bucket of warm spit. God didn't say that, but that's what. And I just looked up at the sky, and I was angry, and I was shouting curses at God. And I finally just shut up, and I said, okay, you win. You win. I accept the deal. I will get serious about my life of service, about the good I could do in the world. And in that instant, and I know this is where people really stand back. Jerome, you mentioned half an hour earlier about people saying larger than life or our experiences or whatever. This is the part that is really unbelievable for people. When I said yes, the Coast Guard cutter Boutwell comes crashing through this wild storm. Visibility now practically nothing. But had the lookout not seen us, it would have cut the little lifeboat in two. And I'm rescued, and the 8 of us are rescued. And I kept that promise, and that's the third thing that shaped my life. I kept that promise. I went back to New York, and at that moment, something else fell in place for me. I met Ann Medlock, who had just started a nonprofit called the Giraffe Heroes Project. Not about animals. Ann had started it because she was sick and tired of all the media of the time telling only stories of rape and pillage, negative stories. But she knew there were plenty of people in New York and elsewhere doing good in the world, and nobody was telling their stories. There was no way to inspire the rest of us. And so she determined she would start her own news service as a rival to NBC and CBS, and she'd do it from her apartment on Central Park West. And so she did. And she called it the Giraffe Heroes Project. Giraffe, because what she was doing was getting people to stick their necks out, get involved in solving public problems. So stick your neck out, giraffe, long neck. The metaphor worked. And she began doing that. And I thought it was lightweight at first, because I was convinced that if I could just give enough speeches, people would say, oh, John's right. I'm going to do good in the world. Well, life didn't work like that. What did work was telling stories. And Ann knew that, and Medlock knew that. And so she began this storytelling service. And in those years, this was 1982, she told those stories by sending out faxes or by stuffing paper press releases into envelopes and sending them to newsrooms, or recording the stories on vinyl records. Some people listening to this may not even know what a vinyl record is. It's a piece of plastic that rounds around, sound comes out. And she would get a star from stage acting or movies to do the voiceover, create little 5-minute segments and send them out to radio stations with giraffe stories on them. And it took off. And within a year or two, there was a nice story in the New York Times, and the Giraffe Heroes Project was off and running. And I got really serious about it very soon, because I fell crazy in love with Ann, and we got married also in 1982. And so we've been together, husband and wife, business partners, leading the Giraffe Heroes Project ever since. What's that now? 44 years.
Wow.
But we haven't changed. The message hasn't changed. We find people sticking their necks out. We tell their stories, no longer with fax machines, of course. We use the latest in social media. But the mission hasn't changed. And now, after 44 years, we've told the stories of over 2,000 of these people, special people, We call them Giraffe Heroes. And by telling those stories, we've inspired, we don't know exactly, hundreds of thousands, millions of people to get up off their butts and do something to solve the problems that concern them, whether it's a corrupt government or getting relief supplies into Gaza or ending the war in Iran or whatever it is. They need to get active, and our stories of other people, giving them examples, help them do that. We also, between the two of us, a bunch of books on leadership, uh, telling people how to stick their necks out to solve problems without getting their heads cut off. So we are kind of like a full service civic action organization. And we're both now seniors. I mean, I was just 84 last week, and Ann is even older. But we love doing this, and it's done a lot of good, and it's been the perfect place for me with my skill set. So here I am, and that brings us up to date. One of the things I'm doing is asked to be invited onto wonderful podcasts like this one, a leadership story, because what we're talking about in the Giraffe Heroes Project really is all about leadership. It's about taking charge of, first of all, taking charge of your own life, but then leading others through your own example to join you, to put their shoulders to the wheel. So if nothing else, to write your nonprofit a check, but more to the point, often doing something physically. I mean, if some are trying to ban the books in your kid's middle school, going to a school board meeting and raising your hand and saying, no, you're not going to do that. And then inviting people, calling you bad names and stuff, but fighting for what is right. What we do is encourage people to do that, and they do it.
Amazing. First of all, I just want to thank you for telling us your story, and just very inspiring and engaging, and the ups and downs of life. It could have that could have been enough, right? And now to just be inspiring for people, but you've got this organization, Giraffe Heroes Project, that really sort of, it's almost like, I mean, I can see why you told us the full story, because you didn't actually tell us the full story. We'd be here for days, but you told us, a good chunk of the story are those three big turning points of your life, because that transitions beautifully into what you're doing now. And to me, what's striking is the contrast, in that story of where you started and where you ended up, and how those things occur to people, whether it's kind of in an extreme environment like you were in that lifeboat, or I think for a lot of people, probably most people, it's in very small moments that we get realizations and we decide to turn our lives. But sadly, for a lot of people, they never turn their lives around, right? They never get that moment. They never get that moment of realization. And so I love that there's Giraffe Heroes Project to sort of guide people a little bit who may have an inkling that, hey, maybe I could do some good over here. Maybe I could be an agent of change. I just don't know how to do that. So anyway, I just wanted to comment on that, but I did have another question for you. And of course we'll probably have to end there. But the question has to do with the Giraffe Heroes Project. And, you've been doing it 44 years, I think you said, and you're collecting all these stories. I'm curious for you, John, we hear, because that doom and gloom loop that inspired Anne Medlock to create the Giraffe Heroes Project in the first place, it's still going on. It's on repeat. It's still happening. We're still getting the doom and gloom mostly, right? And so I wonder for you, after collecting all these stories of people who stick their necks out, and guiding people in that way, what gives you hope today?
What gives me hope, I think, is that for all of us, left, right, men, women, whatever, there's nothing more important than finding the personal meaning of our lives. I was looking for personal meaning as a young man in physical and even violent adventure, and I found it for a decade or so. The adrenaline rushes were very meaningful. And had you asked me this question then, I would have said adventure is the meaning for my life. Then I found, as I said, that was too shallow, and I knew that. So today, I look around at the same world you've just described, and I understand perfectly well the problems are still with us. But I also see people are still looking for meaning of their lives. I have friends, you do too, who think they found the meaning of their lives in amassing money or power or both. And all I can say is at 84 is at a certain point, you're going to find out that's not enough. So what is the meaning of your life? You have to keep searching for it. And what I discovered, and what a lot of these giraffe heroes have discovered, is that the one true stable meaning for life is service, is giving back. Practically speaking, that means looking out around you from your local environment, your hometown to the globe, finding out what needs fixing, and then doing something about it, finding a public problem and helping solve it, making a difference in the world. That's where real service comes from. And I've seen this again and again and again. And we get a lot of feedback from people who have discovered that. And you don't have to shift your life dramatically. You can be of real service as a businessman or an entrepreneur, for example. And I do a lot of speaking to business groups. How can you do that? Well, make a good product, sell it for a fair price under good labor conditions, sound environmental conditions, and as a good neighbor in the communities where your plants might operate. You do all that; it's a service. You're of service by going to a school board meeting, listening carefully, and then moving toward those things that are going to help your kids instead of hurt them. You do it by finding your way of giving back, your way of service. And I keep telling people that, and I keep saying, look, you don't have, it's not about being Mother Teresa. Service is not about sackcloth and ashes. It's about looking around yourself, seeing, I happen to be really good at math, or I'm good at music, or I'm good here, good there, or I'm not so good there. And sort of taking a look at your skills, whatever you've got, whatever you've trained yourself to do, and seeing where you can put those to service. Maybe it's something more than just maximizing your company's third quarter earnings. Maybe it's more than just being, just winning an acting award or something. Maybe it's something where you're really doing something that's giving back. And it's not that hard to see that, as long as you have the 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 guidance of doing it to increase the meaning of your life. And once you find that, once you find the meaning of your life, I can tell you, maybe the two of you could probably experience this as well. When you find the meaning of your life, everything you're doing makes more sense. You're happier. You're going to live long. Your life gets you have more friends. You're more a good neighbor in your community, and it doesn't matter whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, or of course, it doesn't matter whether you're male or female. And youngsters can learn this too. The Giraffe Heroes Project has created a curriculum that reaches all the way down to kindergarten, for example, where a little kid may find some terrific meaning in doing something that blocks bullies in the schoolyard, or picking up trash in the schoolyard, or something that a kindergartner can do. So we urge people to do that. And in 44 years experience, I'm utterly convinced that that's the path to a successful life.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. I mean, we could probably go on, but on that note of inspiration and meaning, encouraging everyone to find that meaning, find that purpose, find that service that you can provide. And certainly Giraffe Heroes Project is there to guide you in doing that. So I really want to thank you, John, for sharing that with us. And we'll make sure to, and we have links and information in the episode notes that people can go and look up so that they can learn more how they can get involved. But I really want to thank you again. Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me. And I, if I could get another 20 seconds, I forgot to mention that one of the things that I'm doing now related to the Giraffe Heroes Project is a series of short form videos that I call Badass Granddad. Badass, all one word, Granddad with 2 D's in the middle. And it's on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And I do about 2 a week. And they start with an adventure story, which you've heard some of, and they end with a call to action. They end with some life lesson tied to the adventure. And they've been incredibly successful. I mean, in about a year, I amassed a following of 125,000 and
Wow.
a couple million views, and it's really catching on. So I just
That's
say that
great.
as in addition to the Giraffe Heroes Project, have them dial up Badass Granddad. Get it from the search bar on any of those 3 channels.
Excellent.
Writing
Excellent.
that
We'll
down.
make sure
I've
to
been
add
writing
that as well.
notes this whole time, but I have to write this down too. Otherwise, But
Absolutely.
listen,
Well, yeah,
I
thank you so much. Go ahead, Julienne. Yeah.
we don't believe in one and done. When we have people, when we invite them into our podcasts, we always want to keep a relationship. So we feel honored you're part of us, and we also going to be talking behind your back, because there's another part to this series. Once we finish our interviews, we always do a reflection one afterwards that you'll see in the queue. So, but it's really an honor, and thank you for connecting with me and sharing it. And there's so many things to say, but we can't at this moment, given time. But thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
Thanks so much.
thank you for doing what you're doing. I think it's great that you're doing this and doing it with this vision. It's a powerful vision you have, the two of you, and I congratulate you on your success.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Well, to our listeners now, I want to thank all of you for listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, as well as watching us on YouTube. We will be back again soon with another episode. But as always, you can go and check out narrative.com, narrativ.com/podcast to find our entire archive of more than 200 episodes as of right now.
This is insane. Okay.
And this was quite an inspiring story, I would say. So if you're inspired and want to tell your own story or find ways to tell your own story, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us, because that's what we do, Julienne and I. We help companies and individuals tell their stories and also become better listeners as part of the process. So if you're interested in that, please hit us up, and we're always happy to listen to any of your challenges, always happy to listen to anyone. So please don't hesitate, and we will see you next time. As always, Julienne, thank you so much for being my wonderful co-host.
Okay, let me get it in the frame. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narrative.com.